To establish.
Go ahead.
Not live. Sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Fumbling without Adam Levitan. Hello and welcome to Establish the Pools. I'm Peter Jennings, doing my best impression of Adam. Of course, joined with here with Mark. We're going to be discussing all things pools. We're going to be discussing Survivor, if you're still left, Pick'ems, and of course, get into some Pick'ems over at Underdog, which the show is sponsored by. Mark, how are you doing, man?
Doing great. Was bummed to miss Thanksgiving. I do love Thanksgiving though. Kind of on the opposite end of Adam. Last name Dankenbring means bring thanks in German. So I've grown up to love Thanksgiving. It was a great day of football. Yeah, I had the Cowboys and some pick'em stuff. So that was a brutal beat for them to get backdoored there by the Giants. Also had got some of my cousins on that game. So that was a brutal L for them, missing the field goal and then Giants scoring a touchdown. With like 8 seconds left, I think. So that was a bummer, but otherwise good Thanksgiving week. Excited to be back talking with you.
Yeah, I was bummed to not be there for Thanksgiving as well. That was a bad week. Started off perfect the first game, but the second game went about as poorly as it could. And that was kind of a bummer just to see how things played out. But forward-looking show, we're on to this week, and I have a big decision to make. And I think a lot of people have a similar question or in a similar spot. 254 people left in the DraftKings Survivor with a little over 1.2 million to the people who survive and or get first place. So the big decision this week, which I have just been going back and forth, and I can't really figure out. So Mark, I'm hoping you have a strong lean here, is between Seattle and the Browns. I still have Buffalo left, which obviously didn't use them last night. Mm-hmm. But that is one kind of ace up my sleeve for kind of the rest of the year. But for the most part, I've used a lot of the good teams. There's a couple spots where I have some obvious picks, like the Titans in Week 16 when they get the Texans at home. But of the tough spots, this is probably the toughest choice between these two teams. Seattle, the big thing the reason I don't want to take Seattle is I think they could be a pretty nice pick in Week 18 where they have the same matchup, but at home versus this Rams team that I think will be in the tank. The issue with the Browns is you have Deshaun Watson coming back, which I think introduces quite a bit of variance. I wouldn't be surprised to see him play great, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him play terrible and be rusty. So what's your view on these two teams, and how are you thinking about Survivor for this week?
Yeah, I feel a little bit better about the Seahawks. If we didn't have Week 18 to think about, I think they would definitely be my pick. The Rams are just beyond decimated right now, injury-wise. This past week, Aaron Donald's going to be out. It looks like Stafford's going to be out. And they just announced John Walford is expected to start over Bryce Perkins, which I think is a little interesting. But probably doesn't move the needle too much here. But, I mean, like the Rams, when you look at their Super Bowl team from last year, I think Van Jefferson and Cam Akers are pretty much the only guys still standing there. And then like one offensive tackle, at least on offense. It's just been absolutely horrible for them injury wise. The Seahawks coming off that tough loss, like they need this game. So I would be inclined to lean the Seahawks just with the continuity there. You meant my concerns with the Browns are the same as yours, just in that, Deshaun comes out a little rusty. The offense isn't clicking on all cylinders, but the Texans have looked so bad that, I think we can kind of feel decent about the Browns here still. And they are the number one offensive line over defensive line mismatch in Brandon Thorne's article this week, which makes me feel better about, Chubb just being able to run it down the Texans' throat. So I feel good about both teams. I'm sorry I don't have a stronger lean for you and can push you in one direction. Since you have the Seahawks to hold on to for Week 18, like I think that might be the better move, but I think both are, strong plays, and I'd feel happy with either, honestly. So that's kind of my take on those two.
Yeah, I think that's good analysis and kind of echoes a lot of the thoughts that I have. There's other spots. I'm not in this position, but if you have Dallas left, I think it's a pretty good spot to use Dallas.
Definitely.
I think a lot of people have used Dallas, but if you're in a spot where you haven't, this is about as good of a spot as you're going to get. Although next week they do have Houston at home. So if you can hold on to them for one more week, you can go with that. But also we're getting late in the season here. So I think there's merit to taking them this week. And then the other team that I think a lot of people will use if they have them available is Baltimore. Mm-hmm. they have the Broncos who are just playing absolutely terrible. Any view on those, and then any kind of long shot survivor picks that you would consider?
Yeah, I love the Cowboys this week. I think they're a great team, against the Colts. Just I think match up so well against them. If they build a lead and Matt Ryan is forced to drop back and pass, that could just be a huge mess there for the Colts. The Ravens, we're seeing some movement here on the unabated odds screen. Just went up to over minus 500 on Deck Prism, which is interesting. How popular did they end up being against the Panthers a few weeks ago? Were they as owned as you thought they might be?
I think that was the week they were like 24% or something like that. They came in
Okay.
under what we were expecting. I think a lot of teams had just used them in that week one. So I don't imagine that many people have Baltimore. I think the people that did use them or didn't use them early in the season used them in that Carolina matchup. But certainly some people probably still have them. I mean, a couple. And if you are in that spot, I think they're a pretty nice choice. For the rest of the season, Baltimore doesn't really have like any spectacular spots, similar spots to this at home against Atlanta in week 16, where week 16 you have a bunch of good spots. And then week 17, they have Pittsburgh at home where they're a 9-point favorite. So I don't think there's any reason to save them if you still have Baltimore, given there's some really good options in week 16 and week 17.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I,
they're interesting.
I don't have too many off the board plays. I would say, we got some data from Run Your Pool, which I'm not sure how well it reflects to the DraftKings pool. The Vikings were pretty high up in that though, and that's a team I would probably avoid this week. Even though the money line is close to 200 there, I feel good about the Jets under Mike White and wouldn't necessarily want to take the Vikings. I think, there's 4 or 5 other better options. The 49ers are a team we've talked about a lot, and they've had some usable weeks the last couple. So I don't think you necessarily, even if you have them, I'm not sure you'd want to go there against the Dolphins, but they're also kind of, up above minus 200 there, money line odds. But yeah, I think, I think Seahawks and Browns are where you want to go. Dallas, again, I'd feel great about. The Ravens, with Lamar, he left practice with a quad injury. Everything seems like he's going to be fine. Probably just overly cautious there, but their offense is so reliant on him now, just, without Rashad Bateman, like they just have, limited offensive weapons. Even going up against the Broncos, I could see that being a really low scoring game and just kind of a tough sweat, even with the Ravens as massive favorites there.
Right. No, I think that all makes sense and is good analysis. We'll see what I end up clicking. The unabated line right now, just at this exact moment in time, is making the decision even more brutal. Browns just moved to minus 287 with no vig. Seahawks minus 284. So it's really, really close. And I think that's the decision that a lot of people have. So I think people have left both those teams in a lot of situations if they're still left in a survivor. Let's move to the pick'em pools, which I think are really interesting. Curious how you're doing on DraftKings and how you're thinking about pick'em this week.
Yeah, I was up, I was around like 62.5%, went 2-3 last week, which was a bummer. Mentioned the Cowboys were a tough loss for me. And then I also had the Falcons plus 4.5, and they were on the doorstep of either tying that game up or potentially winning in the last seconds. And Mariota threw a pick on the goal line. So that was another tough loss. So yeah, I'm going to start getting a bit more contrarian now that I'm, right around 60%, definitely behind the field a bit. So I think, yeah, now, we're entering week 13, only have 6 weeks of this left. So I think I'm personally going to start getting a bit more contrarian and being more thoughtful about kind of the edges that I'm taking here. How are you still doing pretty well with all of yours?
Yeah, I was just going to pull up. Last week I skipped for a lot of my teams, just given the odds came out late, and then Thanksgiving there's no value because they basically were released late on Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't much value. And, unfortunately, I skipped it because I went 4-1 on my main team. I had skipped a couple weeks in the past with a couple of the 10 entries. So I'm actually pulling this up right now, and of course I have to do the
That's
old
great though.
verification thing.
Yeah, that's great though. 4-1 with the teams you chose. Definitely feel like you're having a great run this year there.
Yeah, it's the one spot that and best ball are going a lot better than DFS tournaments. It's funny. It's like DFS cash games are going great. It's one of my best win rates. I'm winning about 70% of my head-to-head, 65% double ups. Doing well in the pools, doing well in best ball, and it's all overshadowed and net down at least as of right now, because of GPPs. So the GPP bro life is not going well. Hopefully, I can find a win here late. But yeah, the pools are a lot of fun, and I'm excited to hopefully do more volume next year. I do think it's really interesting. So right now, I have like 3 or 4 teams cashing, and then I have some other teams that are farther down. I'm between 61.7 and 69.1%, and it's really tight. So I'll probably start mixing and matching some, especially on the 61.7% team. I might get a little contrarian, but I still think I'll ride a decent bit of chalk and kind of see how things play out over the next couple weeks. So if you're on the bubble, I think you can kind of do that, but we'll see. I don't know if we're going to have like massive line moves.
Hmm.
But there's still injury stuff that could happen. I think my favorite play at this point in time is probably the Browns. I think that line will move to like 7.5. We just talked about them with the Survivor. I feel much better with 6.5 than I do 7. So that's
Definitely.
probably my favorite current play at this point in time. How are you thinking about the board for Pick'em?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the Browns are likely to be the most popular pick here this week. I know Adam pinged Matt Davidow too about, the Browns line, and Davidow expects it to move off of 7 even higher. So, we could see that edge move up as we get closer to kickoff there. So I'd expect the Browns, as we mentioned, popular survivor pick. We see a big edge here on the spread. So I think they'll be super popular. So for my instance, if I'm going a little contrarian, I think that's an interesting spot to either get away from, or I don't know if I have the heart to take the other side of the Texans there. But I think just kind of with it being Deshaun's first game, I'm willing to potentially fade if I'm in the spot that I need to gain up grounds. In terms of the Bears, I think the line movement is purely just Justin Fields getting cleared to play, and it looks like he's going to start for them. So I think that's the reason for the movement there, and I feel pretty solid about that. Honestly, we saw the Eagles just absolutely run all over the Packers this past weekend, and we know that's the Bears' preferred game plan is just to run as much as possible. So the Bears do have a bye next week. So my thought is, why would they bring Justin Fields back if he wasn't at or very close to 100%? So I imagine they're going to let him run at least pretty close to what he had been previously to the injury. So I feel pretty confident, in the Bears at that line. I think that's, a good edge, and one I'll be attacking. The Vikings I mentioned, I definitely don't love, going there this week, even though we get the -2.5 to -3. I think the Jets under Mike White are, like a legit good team. I'm not much of like a QB analyst, but the ones I listen to that have experience and have watched the Mike White film just say, he's a great processor, can really just operate within the confines of the offense. And I think that, with the talent they have there on the Jets, like I feel good about them. And then their defense is pretty elite thus far. So they're kind of a team I want to bet on rather than against, moving forward until I think the market catches up to them. So I think I'm probably off the Vikings this week, and that might be a game that I choose the other side to get a bit contrarian.
Yeah, that's kind of in line with how I'm thinking. I've been high on the Jets for a while, and I think the quarterback change is obviously really good for them. I've been high on them just because their defense is so good.
Hmm.
They have an elite pass rush, a really good front four. Honestly, their front seven is quite strong, and then you have a really talented corner in Sauce Gardner, who I think will match up pretty well with Justin Jefferson. That's a tough matchup for anyone, but they certainly have what it takes on defense to really, kind of mitigate what the Vikings do well. Kirk Cousins is elite when he's not pressured, and he's horrible when he's pressured. So I'm with you there. I think that's a sharp call. And if I was behind, I certainly think the Jets make a lot of sense. This Raiders line is kind of the interesting one to me. It doesn't matter that much. Anything in between 0 and 2 is just not that relevant.
Hmm.
But it is interesting to see kind of the market move. Not exactly sure why that's happening. I guess the Raiders have had a lot of losses, but they've been in a ton of close games, and they're at home here. It sounds like maybe Mike Williams won't play. What, do you ever read on Mike Williams?
Yeah, it sounds like he's going to be out another week.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So maybe that's a decent spot to go to. And then, yeah, I think watching the news is going to be critical. I mean, that we have you talked a lot about the Bears and the Packers, like that's we're watching both quarterbacks. So we'll see what happens there. And then, yeah, some of these other spots are just gross. Like the Titans right now ranking
Mm-hmm.
decently. I've been on the Eagles all year. Don't feel great about that. The Rams, I mean, I guess you're getting 7.5. I don't know. I would love, ideally, I'd have like a little bit of a hedge situation going on with my survivor and the pick'em, but I could see myself taking the Browns and then taking the Browns and the pick'em for the leverage too. So it's a tricky spot. One other one that I would throw out is I do like the 49ers. Again, I've been high on the 49ers all year. I like this Dolphins team too, but I think the 49ers are in a pretty good spot. And I think that line could move to 4.5, depending on Christian McCaffrey and some other news. But that's a spot that I'm definitely monitoring going into the week.
For sure. I pulled up the odds here, and Deck Prism, they don't line anything at, -1 or +1. They always go to -2.5, and then just adjust the juice, which I think is interesting. And you kind of mentioned just on that Raiders game, the one numbers aren't super valuable. So it is crossing over 0 there, and they're now the favorites. But you're kind of just choosing who's going to win that game. And I honestly don't have a great feel there. Those are two teams I've kind of struggled to figure out all year, especially the Raiders. I thought the Seahawks were a great bet last week, and obviously that didn't turn out too well. But I'm surprised the Colts are on here. Like the Colts, I would definitely not want to bet on. I mentioned if Dallas builds a lead there, I think that could just be an absolute disaster for the Colts. I think you'd either be hoping for a backdoor, or they establish JT early and can kind of keep the game close, so Matt Ryan doesn't have to drop back too much. And then I do like the 49ers call. It looks like they're going to get Eric Armstead back on the defensive line, which is a big upgrade for them, according to Brandon Thorne. And then their offensive tackles are both, or the Dolphins, offensive tackles are both questionable. I think they ruled out Austin Jackson, the right tackle, and then left tackle Teron Armstead is questionable with a pec strain. And so if he's out, we could really see like the 49ers D-line, make it tough on Tua. So I like that call as an I know better. I think honestly my IKBs this week are the Seahawks. I mentioned I just think the Rams are so decimated. They're now without Aaron Donald. I could see the Seahawks offense, putting up 35 points here, and I just don't think the Rams have the firepower to really compete offensively. And then I kind of like the other side of this Dallas game. I think Dallas is just one of the most talented teams in the NFC. And if that game goes correctly again, I don't have much confidence in the Colts offense. So those are kind of my two other, IKBs along with the Jets.
Cool. All right. Well, I love all those. Let's do some underdog pick'em. Again, the show is sponsored by our friends over at Underdog. The pick'ems are a ton of fun. It sounds like you have a couple, so why don't you go throw one? I'll throw one, and then you can finish us out for the three since Adam's not here.
Sure. So we had released an ETR official of Mike White over 32.5 pass attempts, and right before the show that changed to 33.5. But we project a little over 36. And anytime Zach Wilson has been out for the Jets, their pass rate over expectation has spiked, whether that's been Joe Flacco this year, a little bit last year, and then Mike White last year, and so far again this year as well. Last week it was absolutely pouring down rain in New York, and they threw the ball like crazy. And this Minnesota game, I think, could play fast. It's one of the up-tempo games in Pat Thorman's article. So I kind of like the overs in this game, especially, with Mike White. So I'm going to go over his 33.5 pass attempts.
I like that quite a bit. I think that's sharp, and I'm a big Mike White fan, and hopefully this Jets team can make some noise. I'm going to go with Adam Thielen under 49.5 yards, if that still is available on the screen. Yep.
Looks good.
Again, I think the Jets can really dominate this game at the line of scrimmage, and that's going to be bad news for Kirk Cousins. And if they see that a little bit, I mean, we saw what happened on Thanksgiving against Dallas. I think the recipe for them is to run the football a little bit more, to take some of the pass rush off of Kirk Cousins. And Justin Jefferson's such a baller. Initially, I was kind of looking at that under. Sounds like ETR is a pretty healthy projection on Justin Jefferson. Yeah. So I'm not going to fade ETR on that. So Thielen's my guy. And the nice thing too about this Thielen number, if you kind of look at the prop market throughout, Thielen is anywhere between like 46, 45.5 yards. And there's not really many 49s out there. So I think Thielen is a pretty good pick here. I think the highest yards I'm seeing is 48.5 at DraftKings and MGM, and it's both -120 on the under for both those yardages. So a little bit of a line shop in addition to just thinking that the Vikings should run the football a little bit more here. So 49.5 sounds like that's just very similar to the ETR projection. And when you factor in injury rate and other things, median versus mean, I think this is a pretty sharp one with Adam Thielen under.
Yeah, definitely like that. Thielen's explosiveness just hasn't really been there this year either, so definitely needs the volume to get over that number. With our last one, I have a couple options so we can kind of decide together. One of them is Deontay Johnson under 54.5 receiving yards. We have him at about 51 for ETR projections. And I feel like we're being definitely fair with the target share he's seen alongside Kenny Pickett. Deontay is still last in the NFL in terms of yards per target this season. So even though the volume has been there, the efficiency really hasn't. It's definitely a decent matchup for them against the Falcons in the Dome, but I think that's a decent one. And then this is, I'm always hesitant to take two overs here, but Curtis Samuel over 7.5 rush yards, I think is a relatively sharp bet this week. He's gotten carries in 9 of 12 games this year and has gone over that mark every game he's gotten a carry. And then Antonio Gibson is also a little bit banged up this week, left practice with an injury. He's listed questionable. So I think Curtis Samuel could continue to get used in the rushing game here. So do you have a lean between Deontay and Curtis for the last one?
I like the Curtis Samuel one. I've been a Deontay Johnson fan. I'm waiting for him to do well. I think the under there is sharp. Atlanta wants to slow things down, and it's been disappointing being on the Deontay Johnson bandwagon for the last couple of weeks. I was just hoping with Claypool out, he'd see more volume, and it just hasn't been the case. So I think that's pretty sharp. But for this, I like the Curtis Samuel over. I think that's really sharp, and I think they'll continue to get him the ball in those type of situations. So really, all he needs is one rush attempt to get over this number. Ideally, he has a couple, so there's margin for error. But yeah, I think that's a pretty sharp over on his rushing yards.
Sweet. Let's roll with it. So yeah, we got Mike White over 33.5 pass attempts, Thielen under 49.5 receiving yards, and then Curtis Samuel over 7.5 rushing yards. And it's been a few weeks since we've hit this, so I think the prize should be up around $500 or $600 here from Underdog. So definitely get in our Discord. Check this out. If this parlay does hit, we'll be able to give out some free money to the ETR subs. So make sure you're in there and don't miss out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, Mark. Hope everyone has a great week 13. There's a ton of content still coming here at ETR, and pray for me that I make the right decision between the Browns and the Seahawks. So good luck to everyone in week 13, and we'll see you guys throughout the rest of the week.
Awesome. See you, Peter.